আজকের যে সেশনটা আছে ব্রেকআউট সেশন 8, এটা টাইটেলটা হচ্ছে ইমপ্যাক্ট অফ ক্লাইমেট চেঞ্জ। হ্যাঁ, ক্লাইমেট চেঞ্জের যে ইমপ্যাক্ট গুলো আমরা দেখছি বিভিন্ন পর্যায়ে, অর্থনীতিতে, সামাজিক বিষয়গুলোতে, তারপরে সেই বিষয়গুলোর উপর চারটা আজকে আলোচনা হবে। চারটা পেপার আছে, চারজন উপস্থাপক এখানে আছে। আমি বাংলায় বলছি যেহেতু আমার কাছে মনে হয় যে এখানে কেউ ভিনদেশী নাই। হ্যাঁ, বাংলায় বলতে পারি। আমাদের যেভাবে চিন্তা করবো, আর আমাদের সাথে যিনি ডিসকাশনে আছেন সৈয়দ ইউসুফ সাদাত, রিসার্চ ফেলো, সেন্টার ফর পলিসি ডায়ালগে। আর আমি যারা পেপার প্রেজেন্ট করবে তারা একটু আপনাদের পরিচয়টা দিয়ে পেপারটা প্রেজেন্ট করেন। আমরা যেভাবে চিন্তা করছি, 10 থেকে 12 মিনিটের মধ্যে পেপার গুলা প্রেজেন্ট করার চেষ্টা করবেন। তারপরে হচ্ছে আমরা একটু 15 মিনিট ওকে দিব ডিসকাশন, আর পরে যদি প্রশ্ন থাকে সেটা নিব আমরা। তো উই ক্যান স্টার্ট। হ্যাঁ, আমাদের প্রথম পেপার হবে হাউ মাচ ইনকাম গ্যাপ পারসিস অ্যাক্রস জেন্ডার ডাইমেনশন ডিউ টু ক্লাইমেট চেঞ্জ, নিউ এভিডেন্স ফ্রম বাংলাদেশ। এটা প্রেজেন্ট করবে ডক্টর আজরিন করিম, সিনিয়র রিসার্চ ফেলো, বিআইডি।
স্ক্রিন
জি ম্যাম, স্ক্রিন করে দিচ্ছি।
স্ক্রল করে চলে যাবে।
প্রেস করলেই চলে যাবে।
Good afternoon and assalamu alaikum. So I think how much time shall I get? 10 minutes or
10 to 20 minutes, 10, 15, 12 minutes.
12 minutes. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so good afternoon and assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Honorable Chair, for giving me the floor. Being a first presenter after lunch, I think it's a bit challenging for everyone, but probably I'll try to give a good job. Thank you. So the title of my paper today that I'm going to present is How Much Income Gap Persists Across Gender Dimension Due to Climate Change, New Evidence from Bangladesh. So just to introduce myself a bit, I'm Azreen Karim. I'm currently working as a senior research fellow at the Bangladesh Institute of Development Studies, BIDS. So this is the outline that I'm going to follow. Because of time shortage, probably I'll just go over the main, the central points that probably is the focus of this paper. There's a full paper, and just to give you a small background of this work as well, this is basically a joint work between BIDS and the World Bank. So I'll go over the background a bit, talk about the research question, and a bit of definition, and the data we are going to talk about, and the methodology, and showcase some empirical results with some conclusions, challenges, and way forward. So this slide is basically giving you a background on the research gap in the existing literature. I'll just highlight a couple of them. So there's a growing cross-country literature which actually recognizes the differential effects of climate change, particularly on women. So this includes actually effects on women's economic empowerment and female labor force participation, on voice and agency, and gender-based violence. But what we have found out that these studies actually explored the differential impacts in an isolated manner. That means literatures have explored the impacts of climate change on gender indicators, for example, women's empowerment, voice and agency, and gender-based violence separately. So these are not looked at under a single framework. And there are extremely few context-specific studies which have explored gender gap dimension. That means the difference between male and female in the various parity indicator. So obviously what happened that we found quantitative data gap exists in the existing literature. So what we have done here, just to bring all of these three dimensions in a single framework, we thought, why not do the work, try to fulfill this gap and showcase the research gap in the climate development literature by focusing on climate change induced migration and gender nexus dimensions in the rural and urban settings. So the question we ask here and the pillars we examine, there's a very, very simple way of looking at these three dimensions. We ask the main question that how much gap actually persists across gender dimension due to climate change. We try to examine three dimensions of gender parity: economic participation and opportunity, educational attainment, and voice and agency. Now, why we have selected these three pillars? There is a global gender gap report which have got 4 pillars. The way they actually point it out, and try to bring out a gender gap index across the countries. So what we try to do here, because of the constraints in the data, all of the dimensions couldn't be covered, but we tried to match at least 2 main pillars and 1 third pillar. So there are 3 particular dimensions looked at. One is gender gap in employment and sectoral livelihood, the gender gap in income, and the gender gap in educational attainment. And in these particular 3 dimensions, we looked at the difference between male and female. And we had another 4th pillar, which is women's economic empowerment, social decision making, voice and agency, and gender-based violence. But these are the questions we asked to the female respondents only, but they have also responded from the perspective of their husband. That is the reason we put it separately. So how we define this gender gap? We define this gender gap or gender disparities as the percentage differences across selected indicators between men and women. A positive gap, that means plus, it indicates the disparities between male and female when it's higher, then male are higher because male minus female. And a negative gap denotes that differences has been narrower or lower. That means inequalities has been lessened, right? So that's how we define it, showing progress across the gender parity dimension. So this is basically the map showing the location of the survey area, basically the coastal belt. This is the data that we have generated. We have got 403 households. I'll not go too much detail in there. So all these 3 dimensions, the gender gap in employment and sectoral livelihood among the migrated household in the rural and urban. Then we have non-migrated households in the rural and urban as well. We have average income gap between male and female, average income from income generating activity, then gender gap in educational attainment, and here are the summary. So this is basically the summary, the snapshot of the earlier slide. That's why I came straight to here, but probably later on, if you have time, we can scroll back. So what we did, there are 2. The first 2 central dimension is the economic participation and opportunity. And then in intersectionality, we have got educational attainment. What we have done here, in the indicators, basically, we have 16 livelihood strategies, right? And in this particular slide, what we did, we particularly highlighted the ones which are significant, right? Just to, narrow down our focus to see where the gaps are significantly higher. And you'll see that we have colored some of the numbers, and you will see some pluses, right? See double plus, triple plus, things like that. Now, what does those means? So when we have actually 1 plus, we are saying that the gaps are higher. That means below 10%. And when you see 2 pluses, is basically the gaps are between 10% and 20%. That means moderately higher. And when the numbers went beyond 20%, then we put 3 pluses. That means that in those particular categories, the gender gaps are extremely wider, right? So we didn't highlight too much of the negative ones, but because, obviously we wanted to put some advantage towards the women. And this is what the results look like. So a particular type of categories have indicated that the gaps are either moderately higher or extremely higher, right? Say, for example, in paid employee, right? In the rural area, you have got double pluses. In the urban area as well, you have got double pluses. Only 1 triple pluses we have found out is where in the category in the day labor, for casual day labor in the non-agriculture sector in the urban area, right? So this is what the results, the way we have interpreted. And the central question that we have had, that how much income gap is very rarely found. We have tried to focus on the estimated earned income. So this is basically the income we asked to all the household members, but that is excluding the annual income, right? So we wanted to see the difference between male and female only. And here we found significantly difference happening in the the significant difference in the gender gap happening in the rural and urban for migrated households, but not for non-migrated. The numbers are positive, but not significant. In the educational attainment for the tertiary higher secondary sector in the urban area, we have found the gaps to be higher. For the tertiary sector, we have found the gaps to be wider for both migrated and non-migrated in the rural areas. So that's what the picture looks like. So these are the results for the 4th pillar, the gaps in women economic decision, social decision, and we have got a summary here. I'm not going to go too much deep, just to highlight the ones where we have found the gaps to be significantly higher. It's basically in the reproductive decision making in the urban area. Now, in the recommendation part, because I have got can I take just 2 more minutes? Shall I? Just to sum it up. So I'll not go like reading out the results, just highlighting the ones which we thought is very important to understand. That is very important that we think about removing the gender specific barriers, because there's always a specific gender entry point to reduce the gap. Now we have to find out what are those barriers, how to close that, and how to narrow it down. So we need to adopt self-employment in the non-agriculture sector for non-migrated households. Women's access to productive resources and credit is very important. And the male-dominated sectors should be made more accessible to women. We are focused on women-focused network-based community groups with prioritization of women, and access to productive resources should be provided to non-migrated households. Before I conclude my final remark, I just want to shed some light on this slide, just maybe a couple of seconds, if I can conclude it, that what actually next? Because of our experience with working with the World Bank, we have found out that the World Bank, whenever they're working in several African countries like Ghana or Kenya, place like that, it's actually important to understand how to solve this problem, whether we should adopt programmatic approach or institutional approach. What kind of state offerings we're giving compared to private sector interventions, and obviously what will be the interesting new role of the NGOs. So that is something of striking findings of our study as well. We have found out that the NGOs in the coastal belt can actually play a very crucial role in terms of skill match, because whatever they propose, that is coming with a bundle offer, like job plus loan, something like that. So if they offer a loan, there is a choice for those people to go and go to a diversified job in a different way, right? So that can be a very interesting way to work out skill match among the migrated households in the coastal belt. So this is my final remark for this session, that is very important that we understand the inclusiveness challenges, the gender differences in economic and social empowerment, and women's participation in economic leadership. This study actually re-emphasizes that gender inequality persists and also matters to address the challenges of climate change, necessitating the need for incentive-based gender safety net to protect women from poverty traps and ensure climate and gender well-being in the longer term. Having said that, thank you very much for your kind attention and for being a very, very attentive listener. And thank you, Sanim, for giving me the opportunity to present this paper. And thank you, the Honorable Chair, as well.
Just one observation. What was the data set that you used?
So this is basically a survey we have done.
Okay. Sample size.
The sample size is 403. It's a basically, there's a households, and it's basically both quantitative and qualitative work. We have done some FGDs as well.
Okay. Thank you so much. Okay. Thank you so much. Very interesting study. I think we'll have more discussion on it when we finish all these other three papers. The next paper is on assessing out-of-pocket healthcare expenditure driven by floods in Bangladesh, evidence from Household Income and Expense Survey 2022. This will be presented by Minhajul Hassan Papun.
হ্যাঁ ওটা আমি আপলোড করেছি একটা সেকেন্ড
Hello everyone, good afternoon. I'm Minhajul Hassan Papon, and my co-presenter is Tomigata Sneha. Me and Tomigata Sneha have formulated the paper. Now currently I have changed from researcher to banker, and Tomigata is also is currently a researcher as well. While formulating the paper, I worked in Unan Samonnoy as a research officer, and Tomik also works here. So while formulating the paper, we were interested in working on household income expenditure data set. So as I am a student of health economics, and Tomik is also a student of economics, so we took the assessing the out-of-pocket healthcare expenditure driven by floods in Bangladesh. So actually the notion is, we know in 2022, Bangladesh had see a massive floods, as I can remember, like in Sylhet specifically. So that's why we took only floods for this research experiment. So now I'm conducting my presentation. So here is some introduction as well. We know Bangladesh is one of the climate vulnerable countries in the world. And flash floods impose a significant health and economic challenges as well. And these floods has causes like health crisis and financial burdens on households. So, like people lost their wealth, people lost their lives, and people lost money as well. So there are some health status impact, also financial impact as well. So in 2016-17 highest data set, we saw that 68.5% of healthcare expenditure in Bangladesh are out of pocket. Out of pocket are simply the expenditure which came from your pocket and not paid by the government. So here in in this case, around 100 million of households globally fall into poverty due to healthcare cost. As we know, healthcare cost is significantly higher in different countries. And flood also increases the risk of waterborne disease like malnutrition, high medical costs, etc. And I think these findings will help design the financial protection mechanism for the actually vulnerable households. So here are some research objectives. To assess the extent and impact of out-of-pocket healthcare expenditure in flood-affected household in Bangladesh, and to identify determinants of OPE in flood-affected households, examining what are the coping strategies for healthcare financing, and to assess the catastrophic health expenditure and distress financing in flood-affected regions. So we have done some literature review. Since time is very short, I'm moving to the methodology part. Yes. So we know in 2022 highest data set, there are about 12,220 households who are being taken to the study. Among this, only 863 households are affected in floods. So we only took those households for the examination. So we took direct medical cost, direct non-medical cost. Direct medical cost include hospital fees, medication, physician, and direct non-medical cost reflects transportation, informal tips, and other expenses. So here are some household characteristics like size, gender, age distribution, education, earning status, etc. Here the methodology part. We took a regression model to investigate the external impact of out of healthcare expenditure. So now I'm moving to the findings. So here are some demographic characteristics. We saw a majority of affected households are rural, like 91.62% households live in rural area. And about the household age, we see household heads age about 36.06% of household age live in 45 to 60 years. The education of household head looking at like about 45.71% of household heads had no education at all from the affected in floods, and there are about like under SSP like social safety net program, about 54.7% of affected floods household had no SSP. And we got under the division as well. We saw that about 26.43% of floods affected household live in Sylhet, and about Khulna, we only about Moymenshing, we got only 3.58% people affected in floods. That means from the data set we saw that people lives in Moymenshing division affected less in floods. So here are the findings. OP cost for all households only incurred cost in specific items. That means we only took the out-of-pocket expenditure cost who had at least one cost, like at least a consultation fees or at least medical cost or diagnostic cost or transportation cost as well. So under OPD, that means outpatient department, we saw that about the mean value is 38,710 taka. So that means a household had yearly 38,710 taka cost has been incurred from his pocket. And if we include the total expenditure, this value is about 43,763 taka. So here the some OP background, that means out of pocket background. We see the mean value is 39,506 taka. That means a household incurred cost about 39,506 taka yearly. And we had to declassify the result in poorest quartile, richest quartile, and we also made rich and poor ratio. We saw that about the mean value is 20,987 taka. That means people who live in poorest quartile. I forgot to mention that we also declassify the numbers in poorest quartile and richest quartile as well. Poorest quartile takes 20% and richest quartile takes 20% of total income status. So we saw that a household who live in poorest quartile had 20,987 taka. And while the richest the people who lives in richest quartile or the household lives in richest quartile had 77,742 taka, which is pretty much common that like richest quartile spends higher healthcare cost in higher healthcare cost due to floods. And there are also some declassification like gender of household head is also significant here. Like obviously the household head who is male had more cost like 40,840 taka, and the a female household head had incurred 27,771 taka. If we look at the education status, we saw that the household head who had secondary education had overall 39,377 taka, and who had primary education had 42,851 taka. So, and also we see that the household head who had higher education status had 34,588 taka. This can be said that who had higher healthcare, who had higher education had less income, less expenditure in healthcare because he is.
Can you repeat?
Yes, please. 2 minutes, please. Okay. So moving fast, we also see that about Ulna region who had the lowest out-of-pocket expenditure, and Chattogram region has highest healthcare expenditure, which is about 69,625 taka. Since moving fast, this is the representation, determinants of annual OP cost. So annual OP cost, household head age above 60 years old have a higher OP cost, and which is of 18,690 takas compared to those below 30 years old. As in previous slide, like below 30 years is our reference value here, since we took average marginal effect, and we compared this value to the household head who had above 60 years old. About the division, the only significant difference was observed for the Dhaka division, where households have a lower OP cost of 29,020 and 295 taka compared to the Borishal division, since Borishal division is our reference value. So factors contribution in catastrophic healthcare expenditure. We see that about the catastrophic healthcare expenditure, there are two theories from WHO. The OP as 25% of total expenditure. That means a household who had total expenditure of who incurred 25% of total expenditure in out of pocket, and also OP as 40% of non-food expenditure. These are the two theories made by WHO. So we made the made the calculation here. This is the calculation in percentage actually. I want to just explain one thing, like gender of household head, like the male we see is 13.57%, and in counterpart, OP as 40% of non-food expenditure, which is about 22.64%. And this is the findings of OP breakdown. Medicine cost account the highest for the largest share of OP. Diagnostic, transportation, hospital fees contribute significantly. And this is the financial coping strategies. The coping strategies, or we can say distress financing. What is distress financing? Distress financing means suppose a household member is affected in a disease. So he had no particular money or something. So he buy tangible assets like cow, goats, etc., something to tackle down the healthcare expenditure. So we saw that 26.24% of the households rely on distress financing, where about 15% sold their assets, 7.858% borrowed their money, and 3.67% sought help from friends and family. Moving next, so some policy recommendations, like expand social safety net for healthcare. We have very low social safety net program for the household. For the healthcare system, we need a robust contribution from government, from NGOs, and from private sector to come and tackle down the to come and tackle down the measure the financial distress that are happening in the households. There are some limitations as well, like this is cross-sectional data which lacks causal inference. But one of the key limitations that I want to explain is this study didn't assess the causal relationship between out-of-pocket expenditure and floods. Rather, the result shows the situation of out-of-pocket in flood-affected region, as we didn't establish actually any causal relationships. So yes, that's the reference, and that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's an interesting study. We all know about like out-of-pocket expenses are relatively high in Bangladesh. Without flood, I mean, it's almost 70%, no?
Yes.
69 to 70%. But can you give us figure that with flood, with the region with flood, how much is it out of income? Like, is it 90% or is it 85%?
From our study, we see that about it's 77%. Like I think 77% of out of pocket comes
So
from
almost 9 percentage point increase.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Papan. I think the next presentation is on socioeconomic impact of floods on riverine household. A study of Tista River basin area by SM Samuel Morsalim. He's a graduate student at the University of Rajshahi, Bangladesh, right?
Second. Where?
Being the most junior person here, I think it is extremely overwhelming for me. Anyway, hello everyone.
Can you be louder? Mic to Shamli.
So, okay. Hello everyone. I'm SM Samil Mursalim, master's student of Russia University. I'll be presenting socioeconomic impacts of floods on riverine households, a study on Tista River basin area. Tista River is one of the most important transboundary river in northern Bangladesh. Tista River plays important role as a livelihood source for most of the northern part of Bangladesh river people. However, climate change and water control in the upstream using barrages causes many socioeconomic problems and seasonal floods and droughts every year. As a result, it leads to many socioeconomic conditions and leave the people vulnerable. Understanding these problems is very crucial for policy development. I would like to mention that this is an ongoing research initially developed for my undergraduate fieldwork as a 2 credit course, but now I'm planning to take it as my master's thesis. This study aims mainly analyzing socioeconomic conditions of the Tista River basin population, assesses dependency on the river, examine the impact of floods on different aspects of life, identifying coping mechanisms and resilience. Using mixed method approach, the data was collected through interviews, focus group discussions, key informant interviews, and secondary sources. Purposive and snowball sampling was used to cover 50 households over the 7 villages of Kuniagas Union, Lalmonirhat. Data analysis was involved descriptive and statistical analysis using SPSS and Excel. Also, visualization was adopted through graphs and tables. So in the key findings part, here we can see that the average age of the respondents is 47.78 years, with the family size of 5.36 and an average of 3.48 years of schooling, which indicates a low level of education. If we see in the income level, it is extremely poor, roughly 12,000 taka per month. Can you believe that? This is way lower than the Household Income and Expenditure Survey 2022. Moving forward, on the left side, most of the respondents depends on the Tista River, mainly on agriculture, 84%, and livestock raising, 28%. On the right side, you can see that tobacco, 72%, potato, 56%, are the major crops cultivated in the Tista River char and use Tista River water for irrigation. However, 52% respondents do not get enough water and mainly rely on shallow machines. Floods have severe impacts and damages. Here we can see that the key damage areas are the land loss at 86%, home loss at 72%, and livestock loss at 48%.
The frequency means in a year.
No, frequency means the range of the population. Yeah.
Okay.
Now we will see the impacts of floods on different aspects of life. Here you can see that 94% of the respondents face severe decrease in income due to flooding. 62% of the population experienced job loss, and 90% of the respondents face severe disruption in economic activity. Similarly, 74% of the respondents struggled to secure their food. 68% of the respondents finds food shortages. And on the health sector, we can see 88% of the respondents experience health challenges during flooding. And 94% of the respondents have seen education disruption during the time of floods. Most of the respondents rely on mutual help, 96%, and relocation, 76%, as their coping strategies. They really do not have anything else to do. On the right side, while only 6% of the respondents are very resilient, 44% are moderately resilient, and 26 and 24% are not well resilient. That indicates urgent need for community support. In conclusion, we have seen how floods have socio-economic impacts on the river basin people. To mitigate the problems, we can take some measures like strengthening flood infrastructure through river dredging and embankments. This was the most demanded measure from the respondents. I asked them about what can we do or the government can do for you. This is the most demanded measure. Secondly, enhance social support system, higher financial aid for affected households, and healthcare access. Promote agricultural resilience through drought-resistant crops and agricultural insurance schemes. And finally, improve education and awareness through flood preparedness programs and community resilience training. We all have seen how the nation has reacted to the flood situation in Feni last year. But do we really react the same way for the flood situation in the northern part of Bangladesh? I leave this question to the discussion group. Through this study, I have tried to shed light on the actual scenario of the river basin people of my study area. Although this does not reflect the whole situation of the northern part of country, but I believe it will help the policy makers to know the actual scenario and act according to the situation. Thank you for your time. I look forward to your feedbacks.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mursain, for an interesting study. I think this is an issue. No?
Yeah.
I think we have heard about this marriage project and
Recently, a protest was ongoing.
recently. What do you think of? I mean, are these also covered by the proposed project? Some of that, or
Yeah, most
will
of them.
be prospect? What do you think if that is like materialized? What would be the situation? Will it improve dramatically?
Yeah, I hope so, because the most demanded project was the river dredging and embankments. So while the study was conducted, the respondents also wanted the same. So I believe it will bring a tangible change.
So in your thesis, you will cover that. Issue.
Yeah, I am planning to do some causal inferences and regression analysis to see statistical significance, and I hope it will bring more information.
Okay, thank you
for the community.
Thank you. Okay, so the last paper, I think is a work of 5 people, no? Yeah, and you'll be presenting on behalf of them. I think the paper is on quantifying the impact of economic resilience and climate resilience on sustainable economic development. A cross-country panel data analysis. This will be presented by Dr. Mohammad Boktiar Hassan. He is an associate professor, Department of Finance and Banking at the Islamic University of Bangladesh.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon and welcome to my presentation. At first, I would like to thank Sanim for arranging such a nice conference, and particularly Bozlul Haq Khandakar sir and Salim Raihan sir for supporting this conference. So today I'm going to this is Mohammad Boktiar Hassan. I'm associate professor of finance at Islamic University and as well as research fellow of University of Economics, Ho Chi Minh, Vietnam. Okay, this is the project funded by ADB, and there are several co-authors here. So I basically try to quantify the effect of economic and as well as climate resilience on sustainable development. Cross-country panel data analysis. It's a macro economic data balance panel data. Okay, today's discussion basically cover introduction and motivation, then literature gap, then research objective contribution, then data and variables methodologies, then main result, implication, limitation. However, I have to skip some discussion due to time limit. You know, the UN member countries, they have adopted a very ambitious initiative, that is sustainable development, encompassing 17 main goal and 169 target. And they basically focus on three dimensions of progress or development: economic, social, and environment. And main motive is to include all the people in the planet in the development process. There is no one is left behind in the development process. But this ambitious and innovative development process is being challenged by several shocks, like economic and climate shocks. Because this world is continuously facing these shocks in recent time, and these shocks basically create huge cost for the economy. Okay, to tackle this cost, they are shifting on sustainability. Their focus is shifting from sustainability to tackling this shock. So okay. If you look at the statistics here, we can get the idea about the cost of economic loss or cost of this crisis or shocks. As per World Economic Forum, they estimated that shocks may reduce GDP by 1% to 5% annually if the country have weak or poor resilience. Okay, and then COVID-19 also cut economic growth by 3.6%. And recent energy and supply chain disruption also reduces GDP by 1 to 2.5%. Geopolitical risks also may incur severe cost for economy. It is estimated at 14.5 trillion over the last 5 years, according to Lloyd's. Okay, climate. Here, if we look at the climate risks, it also incur huge cost for the economy. Climate disaster due to flood, drought, hurricane, heat waves, then wildfire may cost 3.6 billion even in a single year. And then, as per latest research by ADB, they estimated that world GDP may reduce by 17% by 2017 due to climate change. So it's a huge cost. So what could be the solution? Actually, resilience might be a solution for these shocks. Okay, particularly economic resilience and climate resilience. If we look at the statistics, then we get some idea how resilience can save economic loss from this disruption. As per Global Commission on Adaptation 2019, investing in 1.8 trillion in adaptation measure can yield 7.1 trillion. That is 4% benefit. Benefit. Okay, and then Helligate also estimated that 1% investment in infrastructure resilience would generate benefit 4%. Sorry, $4. So, from the statistics, we see that we have to strengthen resilience against this economic and climate shocks in order to save our economy from this disruption, and as well as to support sustainable development. Here, figure 1 also supporting this notion. There is a positive relationship between resilience and sustainable development. Okay, but although this this observation raises a critical question, that is, to what extent climate and economic resilience contribute to sustainable development. Although this is important to understand, but the existing literature very limitedly focus on this issue. If we look at the literature gap, then we see that the most of these studies basically try to link resilience, either they consider either economic resilience or climate resilience, and try to link with economic growth stability or other indicators rather than sustainable development. So here is the literature gap. We see the earlier study basically they include either climate resilience or economic resilience. They have not bring these two resilience into a single framework. Another gap is that they try to link this resilience with economic growth, quality of life, or economic stability rather than sustainable development. And another gap we may highlight here, that is their study was not so comprehensive. So against this backdrop, we have set our two objectives. One is to assess the impact of this resilience on sustainable development across diverse countries. Another is to see this relationship at across different quantile. Here is the contribution. First contribution, this is the first study. We have bring these two resilience into a single framework and examine their impact on sustainable development. And another contribution is that we have used very comprehensive panel data as well as sophisticated econometric model. Then this is the data and variable. Database, our data is a balanced panel data, and it consists of 31 countries, and it is observed for 15 years, 2007 to 2010. This is the basic model.
Countries are basically what kind of countries? I mean,
It's the blended of developing and developed countries.
Okay.
And this is the basic model, you know. And before going to select method, we just conducted some pre-estimation test, which is very important to select the appropriate method, like cross-sectional dependence, slope, heterogeneity, unit root, and then co-integration. Panel data faces such data challenges, so that's why we have conducted. And as per this test, we found that our data are non-normal and mixed distribution, and then there is a CSD issue, that is cross-sectional dependence, and then slope heterogeneity, then stationarity issue. And another important issue is that our sample is small, particularly time is less than n. That is, time is less than cross-section. So here is the method. Then panel, we have considered panel co-integration. Basically cows, Pedroni, then Westerland, and then our basic model is feasible generalized least square and panel corrected standard errors, and then which is supported by systematic GMM, and then to measure the quantile dependence, we have used panel quantile regression. Here is the summary of statistics. We find non-normality, then correlation is highly correlated with our main variable, but non-existence of multicollinearity, and then cross-sectional dependence test, then homogeneity test, then unit root, and panel co-integration. We found most of the tests indicate that there is a long-run relationship among the studied variable. And then main findings. Should we skip to the main findings at a glance?
Yeah.
I think that would be more better. So findings at a glance. Both our explanatory variable, that is economic and climate resilience, positively impact sustainable development. But according to a panel quantile regression, we found that economic resilience has some heterogeneous effect across different quantile. That is, at the lower quantile, they positively impact, but at the higher quantile, the impact has been reduced. Reduce and at the higher quantile it becomes negative even. But climate resilience consistently positively impact sustainable development across all quantile level. Then trade openness and financial development also positively impact, but natural resources and as well as fixed capital, gross fixed capital formation, they are negatively impacting. And we found a mixed outcome in case of GDP growth. Okay, I want to discuss one thing, that is economic resilience why economic resilience impact weakened at the higher resilience level. Particularly for developed countries, they should not focus more on economic resilience because they need to focus on other dimension of development like social and then social and environmental. So because since they are developed, they are focusing more on industrialization others. So industrialization or others should be is developed at the expense of environment or other issues. So that's why they should not emphasize more on economic resilience, particularly for developed countries. They need to make integration between various resilience like climate and economic resilience, but should not over emphasis on economic resilience. So these are the implication I have already said regarding our main explanatory variable. What should be the main policy implication? Government should integrate both economic and climate resilience into their development strategies, and particularly they should focus on they should focus on infrastructural development, then sound institution, and then they need to increase skill, okay, so that they can tackle the economic shocks, okay, as well as they need to focus on various adaptation strategies so that they can tackle climate related shocks, okay, and also they need to focus more on renewable investment, okay. Then capital formation, since we find negative impact. So in case of capital formation, they should focus on renewable investment.
Okay, I think you can close. Huh?
Okay, okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Bokhtiyar Hassan, for the interesting cross-country panel data analysis. And I think you tried to bring new things into the policy discourse, like the integration of ERI and climate resilience. Okay. So I think we have a designated discussion, Syed Yusuf Sadar, who is from Center for Policy Dialogue, and he will talk about all the 4 papers. Okay.
Okay.
So here's a job to integrate, but we will give him 50 minutes. Is that okay?
Generous will be nice. Good afternoon. Thank you, Sanem and Bazul sir, Selim sir, for inviting me here to this wonderful conference. It's a pleasure to be amongst all of you here today and to discuss these 4 papers. I first want to begin by congratulating all the authors of the papers and on a job well done. And also, I want to mention before I say anything that, of course, doing the research is far more difficult than making comments. And you have worked really hard on these issues for a long time. And of course, because of that, you have more in-depth knowledge of these issues that have been studied. So the comments that I'm going to make are based on my limited knowledge and experience on these subjects and my brief review of your papers. So please keep that in mind. And also, all comments are academic in nature. I don't know any of you personally, and it should be taken in the scientific spirit. So with that said, we can begin. The first paper by Dr. Azrin Karim, it was about how much income gap persists across gender dimensions due to climate change. So this is a very interesting paper in the sense that the nexus between climate change, climate-induced migration, and gender, all 3 of these things together were studied in this paper. Primary data was collected from coastal areas as well as qualitative approaches were also taken, focus group discussions were made. But certain things I would like to point out. First of all, I think So in the research question, it says that, so this is the major point that I want to make, is that throughout the paper, I've seen this, that the main research question is that how much income gap persists across gender dimensions due to climate change. So the fact that the gap is due to climate change, I think this needs to be built a little more in the paper. It is already there, but maybe a little more on how these things are happening due to climate change, because of course the gender gap is a big problem on all the areas that you have covered. For instance, gap in employment, sectoral livelihoods, gap in income, gap in educational attainment. These are all big socioeconomic problems that we have in Bangladesh and across many other developing countries. But whether these gaps are due to climate change or not, maybe that needs to be established a little more strongly in the paper, because then the real novelty and the contribution of the paper will come out. And apart from that, of course, the paper is based on a small region, the coastal areas in the south of Bangladesh. So probably it may not be the same for every other place in Bangladesh. So that generalizability is there. Also, a few things, for instance, maybe a little more information on how many FGDs were conducted, and also in the paper, for instance, uh, how the samples were collected, the sampling in the places in Borishal and Khulna. Like you came up with 403 households, which is quite a large number for a primary survey. So because of this, whether it was how it was done, maybe more detail on that would be interesting. Also, uh, another issue which I found interesting is that in rural migrated households, the gaps are higher for more educated women and more educated individuals, whereas in urban migrated households, it seems that the gap is higher for less educated. So why is that happening? Maybe you can also, maybe it is already in the paper, so but maybe that will be quite interesting as well. And the other thing is that maybe it is my limitation, but in your summary tables, you have some statistical significance. If you could also explain how that significance was, is it correlation or is it something else? I was not very clear on that. And with the recommendations, I think all of these are great recommendations. But again, I come back to my first point that since you're trying to establish that the gaps are due to climate change, so the recommendations could be more related to climate change and how the climate issue can be addressed through these recommendations. So overall, across all your recommendations, if you can bring in a bit more of a climate change flavor, that will be, I think, more interesting. So these are some of my points, and congratulations on the wonderful paper that you have presented. So now I move on to the next paper, which is assessing out-of-pocket health expenditure driven by floods in Bangladesh, evidence from household income and expenditure survey. Again, this is a great paper. It is addressing a critical and timely issue in Bangladesh. Bangladesh, as you know, is highly vulnerable to floods. Floods are the most common natural disaster in Bangladesh and cause immense socio-economic impact. So naturally, this is a very important area of study. Also, in Bangladesh, out-of-pocket expenditure on health is very high. Like Bazu sir mentioned, it's around 70%, one of the highest in South Asia. So poor people, if they have any kind of health problems, they immediately fall below poverty line. And also, when this is compounded by the impact of climate change, it becomes even worse. So, of course, this is a very important area of study. But in the title itself, I was a bit surprised that you have worked with Household Income and Expenditure Survey 2022, which is good in a sense that you're working with microdata. That's really good. But there is also another microdata in BBS. It's called Bangladesh Disaster Statistics 2021. There is a survey which is done by BBS. It was done in 2015. Again, they did another one in 2021. So maybe you can look into that one as well, because that is specifically a survey dedicated to natural disasters and climate-induced natural disasters as well. Also, there is a international database called Emergency Events Database, MDAT database. There also you will get multi-country data on floods and other things. So Uh, so this is one thing. And also, you in your presentation, you have research objectives. So if you want to take this forward, I think it would be interesting if you can transform the objectives to questions. The same with another paper, I think we had this issue that we have objectives for doing the research, but not really formal research questions. So if we can transform these objectives into questions which are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound, then I think we can take this paper forward and the chances of publication in a good place will be much higher. So you can keep the broad area the same, but articulate this in the form of a question rather than objective. Also, in your presentation, you mentioned flood affected regions. So it would be interesting to know how you identified which regions are flood affected or flood prone. For instance, he mentioned about Feni, which is some place where floods never occurred before 5th August, but suddenly it started, flooded. It was flooded out of nowhere. So some regions which we feel floods will never happen, it can be flooded as well. That is another issue. And although you did mention that you're not trying to do causal inference, but there is a regression model here. And over here, one thing I noticed is that there is flood exposure. I think in the paper you mentioned flood exposure is a binary variable 0, 1. So if 1 if exposed to flood, 0 if not exposed to flood. So that I think is a bit oversimplification because some households may have been exposed, but not so badly affected. Others may be very exposed and very badly affected. So yeah, yes. So maybe so if you go into the other database, you'll see more variables which you can use there as well. And moving on. Also, the one thing that struck me was that you found that rich households are spending more out of pocket on healthcare after floods than poor households. But it will be more interesting if you can also show how much they are spending in terms of share of income. So if rich households are spending 77,742 taka yearly, what is that expenditure as a share of their income? And if poor households are spending 20,987 taka yearly, then what is that as a share of their yearly income? Because in the Bangladesh Disaster Statistics 2021, you'll see that the households belonging to the poorest quartile, they're spending as much as they're losing as much as 90% of their income when they're affected by a natural disaster, whereas households from the richest quartile, when they're affected by a natural disaster, they lose only 10% of their income. So how much of your income what share of your income you're spending? Because for the poor household, maybe 20,000 is everything they have. And for the rich household, 77,000 is not a problem. So that is one thing that needs to be, pointed out, because otherwise what you are trying to say is that financial burden on lower income group is higher. This argument is not holding all that strongly. So if you can do that as well. And in coping mechanisms, if you could show coping mechanisms by income groups, that will also be more interesting. And so this is the second paper. So thank you very much. And the third paper, this is again on flood, socioeconomic impact of flood on riverine areas of Bangladesh, and also a very interesting topic given the current discussion regarding this project and everything. And I'm glad that you mentioned upstream barrages and flood water control by the neighboring countries. So that is something we often fail to recognize. So that is important to acknowledge. Again, the one thing that objectives, if you can turn them into research questions, then this can be taken forward more easily. And also, this is based on a primary survey, so the sample is naturally small. But again, I would suggest you also to look into the Bangladesh disaster statistics and maybe have some secondary data as well, like in the regions which you have covered. So this union is in Lalmonirhat. So you will have data for Lalmonirhat in the Bangladesh disaster statistics. So you can compare that national data with your survey data. and see what differences you have found. And yeah, and so, and if you take it forward, naturally, the question that everyone will ask you is that, what do you think about the project? Will it be a good idea or a bad idea? So maybe you have to also develop a stance on that, like what do you want to say? So thank you for your paper. I move on to the final paper, which is on quantifying the impact of economic resilience and climate resilience on sustainable economic development. This is also a very important issue, and of course, the fact that it considers both economic and climate resilience together is a novelty of the paper. And the paper has used sophisticated econometric techniques. And so the results are quite robust. But having said that, a few things, for instance, if we look at your variables, for instance, over here, your dependent variable is sustainable economic development, but inside human development index, we have, income, we have longevity, which is like a life expectancy, and we have the literacy and being knowledgeable part. So the environmental aspect is not there inside HDI, but without the environment, sustainable economic development is not something we can think about. So if you want to call it sustainable economic development, then it has to be something which has some kind of a environmental measure inside it. Also, you have this HDI as your dependent variable. You also have this economic resilience index, climate resilience, which is also an index. Then you have the growth rate, which is a rate of change. And then you have some level variables, which are like gross fixed capital formation, trade, FDI, and total natural resources. So what I want to say is that there are lots of different variables. Some of them are measured in different ways. The scales are also different. So I am sure you have used some form of statistical transformation, but if you haven't, then that is something you might want to consider, because otherwise, if the scales are all different, then interpretation will become complex. And you have proposed a model methodology, functional form. So the functional form, maybe if you can build it on more literature, so how this functional form came about, or if you can do a Davidson-Mackinnon functional form test, that will also be helpful. Or maybe you could also try using a non-parametric technique where a functional form is not assumed, and you let the data decide what kind of functional form is going to take place. So those are some things I think will help improve the paper. As far as tests are concerned, maybe you can do a structural break test for known and unknown structural break also. And yes, and in terms of the other results, I will not say anything. Just one thing is that the group of countries is very diverse, to say the least. And there's only India. Apart from India, there is no other South Asian country. So again, this leads to the question, how much of it will be relevant for Bangladesh? But of course, because you have so many different countries at different income levels, and you also have this quantile regression. So in your recommendations, if you can also classify them by the level of development of the country. So for the developed country, like for instance, for Austria and Australia, the recommendation will be one kind because they are in a higher stage of development. Whereas for instance, India and for even Mexico, it will be a bit different. So since you have different income levels in the data, so maybe recommendations can also be based on grouping, country grouping, based on some kind of level of development. So that is my observation. So thank you so much for your presentations and all the best with your papers.
Thank you, Sadat. Excellent review of all this core paper. We're almost towards 4 o'clock, but we will take some questions. If there are any questions, maybe 3, 4 questions we can take from the floor. And then I will give all the paper writer 1 minute each. And then I will conclude this section. Okay. Any questions from the floor? Yes. Please identify and
I'm Asma Sain from Department of Economics, University of Chicago. My question is to Dr. Azim Karim Mayor and Assam Sabir Morsani. So First, I want to go to Dr. Azrin Puri, ma'am. In your paper that you have shown the survey area as Orissa and Khulna region actually, but is there any specific reason that why you choose this survey area? The first one, and the second one is which statistical method actually you used in the analysis? And my question to SL Samuel Mursalim, first of all, the congratulations that you are the most junior presenter here. So a big shout out to you. And in your paper, you have shown that in policy recommendation segment, there is some advanced flood forecasting system. But do you suggest or do you recommend what can be the advanced flood forecasting system? And second is you have mentioned that to mitigate the challenge, the drought-resistant crops can be harvested. But as far as I know, in Bangladesh, there are some drought-resistant crops like BRRI Dhan 66, Bina Dhan, and hybrid maize. Aren't those crops harvested in this region? Don't you know actually?
Thank you. Anyone? And you wanted to? No? Yes.
Thank you for giving me the floor. আমি বাংলায় পড়ি আমার কোয়েশ্চেনটা হচ্ছে সামিউল
তুমি
মোরসালি
তুমি তোমার পরিচয়টা দাও।
পরিচয় আমি জোহার বিন হুদা ঢাকা ইউনিভার্সিটি অর্থনীতি বিভাগে আছি তৃতীয় বর্ষ ভাইয়া আমার কোয়েশ্চেনটা হচ্ছে কি আপনি আপনার প্রেজেন্টেশনের লাস্টে বলেছিলেন যে ফেনী রিজিয়নের কথা তো আমি ফেনীর বাসিন্দা তো আমি বলতে পারবো যে লাইক ফ্লাডটা কতটা সিভিয়ার ছিল বাট আই ক্যান অলসো এনশিওর যে ফেনী বাউন্স ব্যাক রিয়েল গুড একই জিনিসটা কেন আমরা উত্তরবঙ্গে অতটা দেখি না এটা কি উত্তরবঙ্গে ধরেন ফ্লাডের আগেই কি ইনফ্রাস্ট্রাকচারটা খুব দুর্বল থাকে বা নাকি রিহ্যাবিলিটেশন প্রসেসটা ওইদিকে একটু নজরটা কম পড়ে মানে এই ফেনীর মতো বাউন্স ব্যাকটা কেন নর্দার্ন রিজন গুলো করতে পারে না এই হচ্ছে আমার মানে আপনি রিসার্চে কতটুকু এই জিনিসটা বের করতে পেরেছেন
Any question from this side? Anyone want to ask any question?
So my question is to Samuel Muslim. So the paper discuss policies recommendations, but is there any structural weakness in flood management policies that prevent meaningful progress in the fiscal areas?
Can you identify yourself?
Oh, sorry, my name is Madhuri Vishesh. I am from University of Dhaka Economics.
Anyone? Any more question? এদিকে দাও।
I am Abdul Shakir, research analyst at International Food Policy Research Institute. My question is to Mr. Papan that from your presentation, it is not clear that what is the observations that you use in your regression. So it will be very useful to know the information. And I would like to know that did you only use the observation from flood prone area and or the whole data set? Because if you do not compare the normal observation like the which are not flood prone, and then how do we know that these costs are only driven by flood, not other factors are affecting this cost? So as your title, paper's title is this flood driven cost. So how do we establish the fact that these costs are flood driven?
I think we'll ask if you want to respond to the question. Just 1 minute.
Sure. Thank you, Honorable Chair. Actually expected a question from the female among the audience as well, because there's a gender paper over here. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to merge the comments of the discussant and the question that came from the audience, right? So probably the answer will be there. So the first, I think, comment that came that how we actually look at the issue of climate change here, right? Because as I said in my background, there is a significant data gap, like quantitative data gap that happened to be the case in these 3 dimensions of gender. And that's why we thought to bring those 3 dimensions under a single framework, and we have focused on climate-induced migration. See, compared to economic migration, there's a difference between climate-induced migration and economic migration, and that's how we try to emphasize on the issue of climate change. And we focused on the coastal belt because that is a proven climate vulnerable area. The way we have identified the household, we focused on internal migration, and we actually went for purposive sampling and using some multi-stages. We looked at the poverty level, then the low flood risk, high flood risk, all those regular indicators. We have used several stages, and then we came up with some selected households, and we conducted the survey in the destination region only, right? So there is a reference point. Let me just pound out. Actually, there's very limited amount of time to explain all these, nitty-gritty. All these things are there in the paper, but there's a reference point which is basically Cyclone Amphan, which happened in the year 2020. So what we did, that's a reference point, and due to that particular disaster, cyclone, and afterward, subsequently, the number of natural disaster happened till the survey period of September, October 2023. The amount of houses which actually migrated from that place A to place B, we conducted the houses in place B, right? So there is a bit of things went on.
You survey the same households?
Pardon?
With same households for the subsequent round after 2020?
No. There's no 2020. The reference point is 2020.
No, between 2023.
Right.
You have several surveys.
Yes. There's only one survey, but in that time period, there's amount of, the duration of migration set on an average 17 months. Right? So that's how we try to, select those particular households. And that's why we selected the, Borishal and Khulna. I mean, those, the vulnerable region where we found out those particular, households who have migrated from place A to place B. And in these 403 households, we have got 1,001 male and 922 female. So there how we try to understand the difference between the gaps. I mean, the difference between male and female and understand the gaps across several dimensions. And I think another question was how many FGDs. We have conducted 7 focus group discussions among these households. And the difference between the quantitative survey and the qualitative survey is we try to make a variation. So in this, from two divisions, we have 4 districts. And out of those 4 districts, we try to cover at least on an average 100 households, right? And the proportion was almost 70-30, something like that, right? But just to focus on the female a bit more because it's a gender study. And then we try to cover that in the qualitative survey as well, because we try to make the balance between the 2 type of method so that we can get a better picture, a better narration of what we're trying to look at. And I think one of the observation was more educated households seems to have a more gap in rural migrated compared to urban. I think that particular observation came because we have got wider gap in the higher secondary sector in one, and a wider gap in tertiary education sector. There could be several reasons for that, because there are several programs running on, the NGOs are running very differently, and the type of output. Because in that coastal part, it was very difficult to identify those particular people who are located because they're so vulnerable. And sometimes they're found, very few of them are found out in the urban area, and then we try to locate them in the semi-urban area because it's not Dhaka, right? So it's very difficult to find out exactly where they are, and several reasons could be behind that scenario as well. And in just to answer the question on the significance level, we haven't done any regression model. Very simple. So what we did across several of these indicators, we found out the difference between male and female. So that's the gap, and we tried to do some t-test and see that whether that difference is significant or not. Right. So that's how we try to identify. And then we try to rank those particular activity where we have found the gaps to be wider, significantly wider, than moderately wider, and extremely wide, and narrower on the other way around. So I think those are the main observations for my paper. Thank you very much. Thank you to the honorable discussant, and thank you to the chair as well. Thank you to the audience. Thank you very much.
আচ্ছা, আমি বাংলাতে একটু বলি, শর্ট করে ছোট করে। তো প্রথমে ভাই আপনারটা একটু বলবো। আপনি বলছিলেন যে আমরা কেন বাউন্স ব্যাক করতে পারি না। আমি মেনশন করেছিলাম যে ফেনীর কথা, কারণ হচ্ছে যে ফেনী স্যার যেমন ওখানে বললেন যে হুট করে ফেনী কিন্তু এভাবে এফেক্টেড হয়েছে, যার ফলে পুরো বাংলাদেশ দেখা গেছে যে ফেনীর জন্য ত্রাণ থেকে শুরু করে সব ধরনের স্টেপ নেওয়ার জন্য খুবই অ্যাওয়ার্ড ছিল। কিন্তু আমাদের ওখানে যেটা দেখা যায়, আমার পাশে বাংলাঘাটে আমি নিজে ওখানে ত্রাণ দিতে গিয়েছিলাম, ছোটবেলা থেকে ওখানে বড় হয়েছি। আমি দেখেছি যে এখানকার ফ্লাডের সিস্টেমটা পুরোটাই ভিন্ন। ফ্লাড যেহেতু ব্যারেজ দিয়ে পানি কন্ট্রোল করা হয়, এটা আসলে ডিটেলস অনেক কিছু বলা যায়, কারণ আমাদের প্রতিবেশী দেশ আমাদের সাথে কিরকম বিহেভ করতেছে বা কি করে সেটা আমরা বুঝতে পারি। তো দেখা যায় যে তারা আমাকে জানিয়েছিল যে ভাই আমি ঘুমিয়ে আছি, হুট করে দেখবো যে হচ্ছে সকালে আমার এখানে ফ্লাড চলে আসছে, আবার দেখা যাবে যে বিকেল হতে হতে পানিটা নেমে গেছে, আবার আসবে, এভাবে তারা রীতিমতো প্রায় 2 মাস এভাবেই চলে। সো আসলে বাউন্স ব্যাক যে করবে, বাংলাদেশের সবাই তো আমাদের ওই নর্দার্ন পার্টটা নিয়ে এতটা সিরিয়াস না। আমার মনে হয় যদি পলিসি মেকাররা যথেষ্ট মানে স্টেপ নেয়, তাহলে বাউন্স ব্যাক করা অবশ্যই সম্ভব। ফেনী যেভাবে পারছে, লালমোহেড অবশ্যই পারবে। আর ভাইয়ার কোশ্চেন যেটা ছিল যে হচ্ছে অ্যাডভান্স একটা হচ্ছে ফোরকাস্টিং সিস্টেম। তো আমি এগুলো আমার ছিল, বাট হচ্ছে সময়ের কমে আসলে তুলে ধরা সম্ভব হয়নি। তারা আসলে কোনো ধরনের ওয়ার্নিং সিস্টেমই পায় না। তাদেরকে আমি জিজ্ঞেস করেছিলাম, তারা বলেছে যে টিভিতে হয়তো দেখতে পারে যে বন্যা আসবে, বা হচ্ছে যেহেতু খুব বৃষ্টি হচ্ছে, তো স্বাভাবিকভাবে ধরেই নেওয়া যায় যে ব্যারেজ থেকে পানি তুলে দিবে এবং হচ্ছে বন্যা আসবে। তারা এটার উপর ভর করেই আসলে থাকে। যেমন আমি বলেছিলাম যে তাদের রেজিলিয়েন্স ক্ষমতা খুবই কম, এবং তাদের আসলে মাইগ্রেশন করা বা হচ্ছে একে অপরকে হেল্প করা ছাড়া কোনো গতি থাকে না। আর যেটা ক্রপস এর কথা বললেন, সেটা হচ্ছে যে ওই পানি যেহেতু আসে, তো দেখা যায় যে তারা কনভেনশনাল যত এগ্রিকালচার আছে এটার উপরেই ডিপেন্ড করে। এরকম কোনো স্পেশাল কোনো হচ্ছে ক্রপস তারা ব্যবহার করে না, কারণ তারা জানে যে হয়তো আমি এখন করব, তো ফ্লাডের কারণে আমার এটা কোনো ফলন হবে না। আর যেহেতু এটা আমার হচ্ছে 2 কেডির একটা ফিল্ড ওয়ার্ক ছিল, তো আমি এত ডিটেলসও আসলে ওভাবে সবকিছু কোয়েশ্চেন তাদের কাছ থেকে করে শুনে নিই। আর স্ট্রাকচারাল যে ফ্যাসিলিটিস এর কথা বলতেছেন, হয়তো অনেক ধরনের ফান্ড আসে, যেমন তারা কোনো ধরনের ফাইন্যান্সিয়াল এইড পায় না। এবং মেজর কেসেসে আমরা জানি যে এর আগে যা হয়েছিল, যে ফান্ডটা আসে, তো দেখা যায় চেয়ারম্যান বা এই খবরগুলো আমরা সবাই জানি যে তারা হয়তো তাদের হাত পর্যন্ত পৌঁছায় না সহজ হিসাব যেটা। তো ওখানে যেমন ওই এরিয়াতে এই 7টা ভিলেজ যে আমি নিয়েছি, ওখানে জাস্ট একটা ছিল হচ্ছে বন্যার কি বলে শেল্টার। তো অবশ্যই ওখানকার ইনফ্রাস্ট্রাকচার অবস্থা খুব খারাপ, ওটাও আমার হচ্ছে পেপারে আছে, কিন্তু এখানে তুলে ধরা আসলে সময় পাইনি। তো আই হোপ answer the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Bhaiya. I was expecting this question. Since my title says due to floods, তো বাংলাতেই বলি আসলে যখন হচ্ছে আমরা পেপারটা নিয়ে কাজ করতেছিলাম আর কি, তখনই হচ্ছে আমরা টাইটেলটাকে ফিক্স করেছিলাম আর কি, যে ফ্লাড এফেক্টেড পিপলদের আউট অফ পকেট এক্সপেন্ডিচার বের করবো আর কি। মানে ফ্লাডের কারণে হচ্ছে তাদের আউট অফ পকেট এক্সপেন্ডিচার কত সেটা বের করার প্ল্যান ছিল আর কি। কিন্তু যখন হচ্ছে আমরা এই স্টাডিটা ফার্দার প্রসিড করলাম আর কি, তখন হচ্ছে আমরা আর কি ওরকম হচ্ছে কোনো ইনফারেন্স খুঁজে পাইনি, যেটা আমি অলরেডি হচ্ছে আমার লিমিটেশনে মেনশন করেছি বা পেপারে হচ্ছে মেনশন করা আছে। সো ইউ ক্যান সে যে টাইটেল শুড বি চেঞ্জ ইনটু দ্য সিচুয়েশন অফ flood affected people, situation of out of pocket expenditure and flood affected people. That could be the title exactly. See, if we work further on this topic, we will try to establish the causal inference, but also if not, then maybe we can change the title and add something more significant. Also another question, যেটা ছিল আর কি, হাইসেল যদি ডেটা সেটটা দেখেন আর কি, ওখানে আপনার সেকশন 6 একটা পার্ট ছিল আর কি, যে সেকশন 6টা মেইনলি দুর্যোগ নিয়ে আর কি বলা, যে উক্ত হাউসহোল্ডটি এই দুর্যোগে গত 1 মাসে কোনো দুর্যোগের মধ্যে এফেক্টেড হয়েছে কিনা। এখানে ডিজাস্টার বলতে হচ্ছে ফ্লাড আছে, আর্থকুয়েক আছে, তারপর হচ্ছে খরা আছে ইত্যাদি। সো সো এটা হচ্ছে লজিস্টিক ইয়েস অর নো, যারা এক্স্যাক্টলি হচ্ছে এখানে ইয়েস এ টিক দিয়েছে আর কি ফ্রম দি ডেটা সেট। So we took the primary sampling unit, PSU. So we found about 843 households who are actually affected in floods from the sample size 12,220. That's it. আর কোনো কোশ্চেন ছিল ভাই?
না, ঠিক আছে, ঠিক আছে, পরে
Thank you so much.
although no question come from the audience, but I can reference to the discussion comment or question. First of all, he suggested.
He wants to ask a question. Yeah, sure.
Okay, yes.
So I have a PhD.
You can use the mic.
IIT Roper, India. So
Yes,
I
just
want
use
to
the
ask
please.
one question to ma'am, because you said sir has already asked you a question. I was actually answer. So you partially answered the question.
Yeah, you can.
The question was regarding how you are relating this climate thing and demographic vertical gap. So there's a gap in this education gap. So the thing is that you told me that it is a climate induced. You are identifying the sample as a climate induced or it's a flood induced. So the question is if we can take a particular household who is affected by the flood and he is migrating to some other place, and after some time the household can come back to that place again. So are you including that household into your sample or you are excluding them? Because that can play the roles in your analysis. So one more question to sir is, you have included a cohort of countries, we can say, like those are high income countries and low income countries. But if we see the recent COP24, which was held in Azerbaijan, 29, sorry, COP29. So there was the major issue was that emerging economies do not have the finance to deal with the resiliency part of the climate. So because developed economies are not providing the requisite finance to the developing economies to deal with the climate, because emerging economies are highly affected by the pollution which are produced by the developed economies. In that case, I think it is better to divide the countries because there could be the resiliency effect from the developing economies to deal with the pollution could be different as compared to the developed economies. So in that case, how you are going to deal with that thing? Thank you.
মাইকটা একটু দিতে হবে এখানে, হ্যাঁ? আচ্ছা, আপনি শেষ করুন তারপরে।
Okay, thank you. First of all, I'm going through the first question or first comment to the
Quickly, within one.
Okay. Sure. SDI is the Program of Sustainable Development. That is, SDI is missing environmental aspect. Yes, I acknowledge this, and also I acknowledge this in the limitation section. But this index is developed by UNDP and some experts suggesting to include this environmental aspect, but they're reluctant to include due to non-standardization of environmental data, and some countries are missing this data. So that's why they are reluctant to include environmental aspect to SDI. And this is the one of the main regions. And another region is that we could not extend our sample because of data deficiency, particularly in respect to economic resilience index. This is limited to available for only 31 countries. So that's why we could not extend the sample size. And another thing is the structural back. Yes, the structural back may have some impact on the findings that should be incorporated. And another country-specific recommendation. I think since we have not conducted the analysis segregating country groups, so it is difficult to provide recommendation or suggestion based on country. Okay, so that's why we provide overall suggestion or recommendation. Comes to your question, the sample size could be segregated into developed or developing countries. That would be more. Yes, I agree that the country we should divide our country into developed and developing and conduct the analysis that may generate more country specific data. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the wonderful question. I think I should have mentioned that during my explanation. Actually, like I said, these households have migrated due to a climate-induced event and subsequently, right? And we have two groups of households among the migrated households, temporary and permanent. So that probably answers your question. But we have conducted the house in the destination region only, right? So the way we have interpreted it, we try to link the gaps, specifically in like sectoral livelihood, things like that, based on the type of migrated households, like whether the particular individual have temporarily migrated or permanently migrated, and now the way they responded in terms of diversifying the livelihood, right? So we have the details in the paper, but probably for the time being, if that answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, yes, we're over by almost 10 minutes. Okay. But I think I will not take too much time. I think thank you everyone for your presentation and good contribution to the literature in terms of data generation and also uh, uh, estimation techniques. I have seen some very, new technique has been in your paper, but I think in other papers also we have seen generation of new data and also techniques. And this gives us like different kinds of conclusion, even if, we don't fully agree with the conclusion because of possibly sample size and the question that was there in the mind. But I will request you, if you're interested, go to the SANEM website. I think the paper should be there and you can get all the questions possibly, all the answers that you are still thinking is not fully answered by the presenter. I also like to thank our discussion who has done an excellent job of like summarizing and also providing the review of the papers. I will not go into all the papers. The issue is that whether we believe that climate is a real issue or not. I think in this room, who are in this room, I think we all believe climate is a real issue. But if you look at the global, to fight the climate challenges, we need resources and also technical capacity. And we have seen like a lot of like at the global level, the countries are not united. Okay, we have seen the COPs are failing, right? We cannot come to a conclusion that how to approach this climate issue. And I think with US splitting now, again, I think this will be a real challenge for the world to come up with actions. Like how to handle these things. We have also seen that three large countries in the world are not believing the data or not believing the UN studies. Like I'm pretty sure China is not taking a. We don't know. We have to see how the other country respond. The US has flipped now. The Democrats have won the climate issue, and the Republican under Trump is anti-climate. No, so you have to see how they are. Responding globally. We have to see how they respond. I think in terms of India, I believe India is also like let's watch and wait more, right? So in that sense, the three largest economy are not believing that these are real issues, or even if they're believing, their leaders are not convinced in that way. So I think we have a real challenge, at least for the next 4 years, under Trump administration and all those things. So, and that puts a lot of pressure on the countries like Bangladesh, who are resource poor. And we have seen today that 10,000 NGO workers lost their job in terms of like for the USA fees of USA. And I think 327 NGOs are closing down in Bangladesh. Only in Bangladesh. I think one of your recommendation was like improving or through the NGOs, and we have to see how the NGO will work. And in that context, I think it is also important that how private sector will come forward. I think we need to convince the private sector that this is also their role. And in lot of the discourse, in different kinds of discourse or actions, we see the role of private sector, not only the public sector. I think we need to convince the private sector also, at least in Bangladesh. I don't know about India, I know about China, but at least in Bangladesh we need to, that this is not only a responsibility of the state or the government, it's also responsibility of the private sector. I think with that note, I hope that good things will prevail from the Trump administration, that they will not, they will see a good part of USA, not only the bad part, and then some of the aid are very critical for the world. 40 billion US dollar. It's not small amount of money. And we know that without that, a lot of this activity will be stopped. Okay. So I think with that, I'd like to thank all of you to be here, and we'd like to close this session. Thank you so much. Okay. Thank you.
Everyone to take their PS insert in the